Hey folks, this is Kalani. We have a whole bunch of buffs and nerfs coming through with the next weekly reset, and it's been quite a while since we've seen this many classes buffed at once, and I'm kind of surprised by some of the specs receiving the largest buffs this time around. We also have a whole bunch of new content coming our way. Patch 10.2.5 includes quite a few interesting looking new features, and it could release a lot sooner than we previously thought. But beyond that, it looks like we're going to get a 10.2.6 patch, which will start testing soon, and then the next WoW expansion has also started its testing cycle, so 2024 is going to be a busy year for World of Warcraft. Then we also have some quick updates for the live game, including a very powerful helm enchant that became available this week. There's a lot to talk about this week, so let's break it all down. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. Let's kick things off with the class changes, because we have a whole bunch of buffs for the classes that aren't currently doing too well, as well as a couple of nerfs to try and knock those top classes down a few pegs. Demon Hunters are going to see a 10% damage nerf to their Sigil of Flame, and then for Havoc specifically, Collective Anguish was reduced by 10%, Rage Fire was knocked down to 30% instead of 35% of damage stored, and then a Fire Inside was also nerfed down to 25% from 30%, so less damage overall from Havoc, and then a minor damage nerf to Vengeance as well. Evokers are on the big buff list this week. Devastation is going to see a 15% damage increase to Pyre and a 3% damage increase across the board, so they're going to deal a bit more damage in every situation, but quite a bit more in any AoE scenario where Pyre really gets to shine. Preservation is also getting a buff this week. The previous change to Resonating Sphere is being reverted, so you will once again be applying Echo to 5 allies with Resonating Sphere. That's going to help a lot in any group healing situation and help bump up Preservation's AoE healing potential. Mages are up next with a whole bunch of buffs. For Arcane, Arcane Blast damage is up 6%, and Arcane Missiles damage has been increased by 10%. For Fire Mages, Fire Blast is up 12%, Pyroblast is being increased by 5%, Fireball is up 10%, Flame Strike damage was increased by 12%, and Intensifying Flow will increase Ignite damage by 25% up from 15%. It doesn't stop there though. Frost Mage will see a 15% buff to Frostbolt, a 12% increase to Ice Lance, Flurry is being increased by 10%, and Glacial Spike is even been increased by 6% as well. So in almost every situation, all three mage specs are going to be dealing a lot more damage when these buffs come through. Monks also have some buffs coming through for Windwalker. Spinning Crane kick damage is up 20%, Blackout kick damage is up 10%, Rising Sun kick and Fists of Fury damage are both being increased by 8%, Blackout reinforcement is being buffed up to 250%, Glory of the Dawn damage is up 12%, and Dance of Chi-Ji bonus was increased up to 300%. So some big buffs are coming through for Windwalker. On the other side of things, Mistweaver is going to see a few nerfs going into next week. Unison Healing was nerfed down to 35% from 50%, Enveloping Breath Healing was reduced by 10%, and Essence Font Healing was nerfed by 8%. Mistweavers have been doing very well recently, so it's not too surprising to see a few nerfs come their way. Retribution Paladins also made the list this week, but it's only for a quick 3% damage buff across the board. Definitely not the most exciting news in the world, but again, it's always better than nothing. Moving on, we come to the Priests. Shadow is going to see a buff to Psychic Link that's been increased up to 25% of your direct damage spells, up from 15%, and Holy Priests are going to see a 3% healing increase across the board, with a 15% buff to Prayer of Mending Healing tacked on top. So a couple of buffs for the non-disciplined Priests. Rogues only have one change this week, and it's another nerf for Assassination. They're going to get a 3% damage decrease to all abilities and auto attack damage, so I guess the Rogues are still doing a little too well right now. For the Shamans, Elemental will see a 50% damage buff for Earthquake, Enhancement is getting a buff to Elemental Warding to reduce damage taken by 3 and 6% up from 2 and 4%, and then for Resto, Torrent was buffed up to 15 and 30% up from 10 and 20%, Healing Surge Healing was increased by 12%, and Healing Stream Totem was also increased by 12%. And then we round out this week's list with the War Logs. For Affliction, Seed of Corruption damage has been increased by 10%, Soul Rot now applies up to 4 additional targets, up from 3, and Dark Harvest now increases crit and haste by 4% per target, up from 2.5% per target. Destruction will also be seeing some nice buffs, 12% bonus to Rain of Fire, 25% increase to Cataclysm, Immolation damage from Infernal and Blasphemy was increased by 25%, and then Immolate damage is also up 10%. So quite a few buffs for these two specs, which should hopefully give them a bit more playtime when compared to Demonology. So we have a whole bunch of class changes to look forward to, with a lot of buffs for underperforming specs and classes. Now all of these buffs and nerfs are going live with the next weekly reset, which should be Tuesday, December 19th. Now moving on, we have quite a few updates on the 10.2.5 PTR to talk about, including some new features and content types coming our way. To start with, we're going to see something called the Azerothian Archives added into the game, and this seems to be archaeology themed, which means it could replace archaeology as a system and feature, or maybe just lean into the theme. It's kinda hard to tell at this point. The splash screen has the notes, "Dive into the lost lore and legends of the Dragon Isles," so it's all about history and lore, digging up the past and piecing together some puzzles. We also know that we have a group event to take part in that will be similar to the other public events we've seen in Dragonflight. Everyone contributes to the overall goal, and you'll hopefully walk away with some shiny rewards. There's also a new scenario where we join Gen Greymane and the Gilneans as they try to retake their lost kingdom of Gilneas. We're finally going to see something being done with that old city. It looks way too cool to just leave it there. I'm really interested to see what they do with the city once it has been fully retaken, but I guess we'll have to see how far we get with this new 10.2.5 scenario. Now, we haven't really been able to get much hands-on experience with a good portion of 10.2.5 because it has been very unstable most weeks, and some of the features don't seem fully enabled for testing, which isn't super ideal, but this becomes even more of a concern when you add into the fact that this latest PTR build is also marked as a release candidate, meaning the vast majority of the big changes and new content that make up the patch should be included in this build, and it's considered almost ready to release. Hopefully they can smooth things out so the patch doesn't completely break the game when it goes live, but this also means that we might see patch 10.2.5 a bit sooner than anticipated. With it being marked as a release candidate before the holiday season and break even starts, that means we could see the patch release in early January, probably within the first 2 weeks. It will most likely depend on how stable the patch is when we head over into the new year, but no matter how you look at it, 10.2.5 should hit live servers very soon. Now we also have some other PTR news which is kind of interesting. It looks like another PTR branch is being deployed and it has the first build of patch 10.2.6. Now this first build is encrypted, which means we can't see anything and the Wowhead data miners can't go digging just yet, but that does mean we could see yet another parallel PTR testing cycle moving forward. We know the dev team want to release a few patches between 10.2 and the next expansion. 10.2.5 should be coming our way pretty soon by the looks of things, and then we might move into whatever 10.2.6 has in store, but with them specifically numbering this patch a 0.6 instead of a 0.7 that we've gotten with every other patch so far in Dragonflight, that also leaves a 0.7 on the table still, and potentially even more patches before we ultimately head into 11.0 and the War Within expansion. So we might have a lot more content to look forward to in Dragonflight. Speaking of the War Within, the first encrypted build for the new expansion was also detected this week on one of the dev team's internal servers, so not only are they ramping up PTR testing for multiple patches, they're also potentially starting the testing cycle for the War Within as well. From some info at BlizzCon, we know that alpha for the War Within should start up sometime in spring, so that's still a little ways away, but Wowhead put together a little timeline for when we saw the first encrypted builds of both Dragonflight and Shadowlands, and then compared that to when the alpha started for each expansion, as well as when those expansions eventually released. So we can see that from the date of the first encrypted build to alpha start, that sits around 2 to 3 months. So the alpha for the War Within could begin as early as February, though if the whole spring thing holds true, that would push the alpha back into March, which is still earlier when compared to both Dragonflight and Shadowlands. Those expansions both launched in November, so with an earlier alpha for the War Within, that could point towards an earlier release date for the expansion, or it could mean a longer testing cycle, difficult and therefore more testing and feedback time for this expansion, which definitely would not be a bad thing. One thing is for sure though, we have a lot to get excited about for World of Warcraft in 2024. It's not just future content that we have to get excited about though, because the final wing of the Emir raid was made available on LFR mode this week. You can finally hop in and kill Farak to finish off your story quests, get some shiny loot, and with Farak available now, that also means that everyone now has a chance to get their hands on the new legendary axe. It is going to be a super low drop rate from LFR and will be much higher if you can kill Farak on any higher difficulty, but if LFR is all you have access to, then you'll just have to keep your fingers crossed and kill him every week until the next big patch rolls around. Whatever your goals may be, the entire Emir raid is now available on LFR for anyone and everyone to queue into. That leads very nicely into the last little topic of this week's video, the new powerful head enchant that became available this week as well. You can pick up the quest, the Power of Dreams, inside the Emir raid after killing your first raid boss, and the quest asks you to obtain a few items from specific bosses, and now that Tindral is available in LFR2, everyone should be able to complete that part, but the main time gate here has been the Echoed Ephemera. The only way to get Echoed Ephemera is by killing raid bosses in Emir. Since the raid opened, this has been limited to 10 per week with a cumulative cap, and with this being the 5th week that the raid is available, we are finally able to collect all 50 to finish this quest off. If you're a little behind with this quest, just make sure you're killing as many raid bosses as you can per week and you'll get your ephemera in no time. Now that every boss is available in LFR, that's 9 relatively easy boss kills you can get done per week, so try to at least clear LFR if you aren't running the raid on any higher difficulties. I've gotten up to 5 ephemera for a single boss kill, so you might be able to get all 50 in just 2 weeks if you full clear the raid. When you hand the quest in, you'll get another quest to do a quick combination of materials, after which you'll get the Incandescent Essence. Simply right click this item and apply it to your helm gear slot to get a powerful new enchant. This enchant will give you a special effect depending on your role. Melee DPS have a chance to manifest a cruel blade based on the number of enemies around you, dealing damage over time to a single target, or AoE damage to multiple targets. Ranged DPS have a chance to summon some owls that dive bomb your target, dealing AoE damage. Tanks have a chance when hit to get a buff that causes you to deal splash damage and gain a shield for the damage dealt. And then healers have a chance to apply a barrier to allies, which absorbs damage and inflicts damage to any attackers. If the barrier breaks, the ally gets some healing over time, and if it doesn't break, the ally gets a small versatility buff. Seeing as we don't really have any other helm enchants to work with, the Incandescent Essence is just extra power for your character, so it's going to be super useful to pick up and use. The enchant can be used as many times as you want, so you will always want to apply it to your headpiece as soon as you replace it. But that's all of the updates we have for this week, so that's it for this video. When do you think patch 10.2.5 could release, with the latest build being a release candidate? And how do you feel about this week's round of class changes? Are there any classes that you still think need some big buffs or nerfs? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and all of our members here on YouTube. You can see their names floating by on screen. If you'd like to add your name to the end of every video with a special shout out at the start of the next video, you can find links in the description of Patreon or click the join button just below this video. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.